All right, so you might remember on the last day I saw you guys, or when you came to pick up your work from me before you left for Thanksgiving, I tried to make sure that each of you had enough clay at home with you to make a good several handles. Usually when you're making handles, you want, first of all, it's a new skill, right? So we want to get a little bit of practice in so that we can perfect the technique that we're going to be using. And secondly, making multiple handles gives you an opportunity to shape them a little differently from one another so that you can really start to see how those different shapes look on the side of your mug and what fits aesthetically and also what feels a little more comfortable to your hands. Okay, so I have this remaining bit of my block of clay from my bag here, and I'm just going to use this to start with. I'm going to work on the top layer, and if I decide that the handles I make using this top layer of clay aren't acceptable to me, I can take my clay cutter and cut that off and then go down to the next layer of clay. Okay, but I think in terms of the size of the block of clay, if you guys have something that you just cut straight off your block, this is a pretty good size for the length of our handles that we're going to be cutting out of this clay. So we'll start with this, but then if you guys find that, you know, maybe you need to make handles that are a little bit taller, then we can reshape this block to elongate it, and then you can cut handles that are a little, have a little more length to them, okay? So first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just smooth out the top of this clay. I'm gonna make it a little bit stronger, just like we did with our slabs the other day. I'm gonna use my smooth metal rib. Okay, just clean it off a little bit. I've got some little bit of clay stuck to the edge there. And I don't want to have that scraping against my clay surface. And I'm just gonna use my rib to go across that surface in multiple directions and just compress that clay, pull it all back together nice and tightly. And this will help ensure that when I do go to cut my handle out of the clay, I've got this surface nice and tightly packed together. All right, so again, I sent home a little binder clip handle with each of you guys. These are from relatively large binder clips because what we want to focus on using to create our handle is this larger rounded end. If we're making handles that are too small, they're not going to be strong enough. They're not really going to be large enough to be practical for our mugs. So I tried to send you guys home with a decent size handle so that you can make a really nice, consistent handle for your own mug, okay? Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this part of this binder clip handle and I'm gonna pull it through my clay. And that's gonna give me basically a little rope of clay or sort of like a flattened coil of clay that I'm just gonna cut straight out of here. Important to note that I wanna sink this down into the clay so the top of my clay here comes to about right there where that little curve in this metal is, okay? If I only drop down about this far into the clay, I'm gonna get a really thin, rather weak handle. So I wanna be sure to come all the way up to here. If I go any further, first of all, that handle is gonna be a little awkwardly shaped because it's gonna fill this negative space in here. And I might have trouble actually removing it from the surface once I've cut through it, okay? All right, so let me just move my clay block around so that I can show you how I'm gonna situate this tool onto my clay when I'm getting started. So again, right there at that bend in the metal, I want to line that up with the top edge of my clay here, okay? So I'm gonna try to keep it at that depth as I pull it through, okay? I have it slightly tilted at an angle. You can see when I turn my block of clay this way, this metal is just slightly at about a 45-degree angle, okay? And I'm gonna try to keep that angle the whole way through as I pull it through, okay? So I'll keep this way so you guys can see as I'm pulling it through. I'm just using my index and my middle finger to kind of brace against the two sides of that piece of metal. And then my thumb and my ring finger are gonna kind of support, kind of counter support from behind to keep that angle as I'm pulling, okay? So I'm just gonna start pulling back. Again, trying to keep that depth the same the whole way through. And when I get to the end, I'm just gonna hold my thumb there so that that metal can pull right up against my thumb. If I didn't have my thumb there and just pulled away from it, the likelihood of this ripping is pretty large, okay? So at this point, I can just come in and pull that handle out gently. And then I'm just gonna set it aside for now, okay? I'm gonna do this several times. So again, I've got several handles to use to work with once I'm done. So I'll do this a couple times so you guys can see that a few times over. And once you get to the second one, you can kind of use your fingers to lift up the side of it. So pulling it out of that little space is a little bit easier and it doesn't stretch it too much. And as you go, I really do believe that if you do this several times over, it'll get much easier and it'll make a little more sense to you how this is all working. And your handles will start to look a little bit cleaner, a little bit better, because you're pulling through that clay a little bit faster without much hesitance. Sometimes if you're going too slowly, you tend to kind of move the piece of metal along the way and then you end up getting something that's a little squiggly rather than more straight. Just do one more to finish off this layer. That one's kind of coming up out of the clay. All right, set that aside. All right, so now that I've got those handles cut out, I'm just gonna address each one, get some water on my sponge, squeeze it out as much as I can. And I'm just gonna lightly pull my sponge over the surface so that if any little bits of clay have been stuck to it, or I have maybe some little surface cracks in it, I can just pull those together. All right. So once I've done that, I'm gonna just take a little bit off each end where that clay just got a little bit rough from starting and stopping. And then I'm gonna use that piece of clay, I'm gonna hold it straight up and down on my board, and using my thumb, I'm just gonna press down a little bit to make a nice little flat surface on the end. And then I'm just gonna let this drop down and then press the bottom down. Oops. If you're doing it on your board, sometimes the moisture that you put on the surface of the clay will really help it stick to the board so it can just set up there and dry in place. Okay. All right, so that's one handle. I notice I kind of shaped it like it's sort of like the top of a question mark. Okay, so that's one way to shape a handle. Another way would be to shape it more in a C shape. Which I'll show you here with this one once I get it cleaned up. Again, cut off just a little bit of the top and bottom so you don't cut off too much length of the handle. Okay, so same thing, holding it up, straight up and down against the board and using my thumb just to push gently. I'm not smashing that clay. I'm not smearing it onto the surface. I'm just kind of tacking it down there. And then I'm gonna let this drop again, but at the end, the other end of my handle, I'm just gonna turn and curve that in a bit so that when that handle comes down to the board, I can flatten it the same way I did with the top part of the handle. Okay, and sometimes when I do this, the C-shaped handle, I also like to just give it a little gentle push downward. Not to flatten the top of it, I still want that top part to be curved, but more just to help elongate it. Okay, so that kind of pushes the top part up a little bit and this bottom curve out a little bit so that I can fit my 4 fingers in there a little bit easier when I go to attach it. Okay, so I've got all these other handles here that I could clean up and shape and kind of curve in different ways and maybe cut even to different lengths and see what a shorter handle might look like versus one of my longer handles. So that's something that I want you guys to practice with after you cut several handles out. Once you have gotten the handle that you want to use for your mug, I want you to let it dry to about, you know, maybe a soft leather hard stage. So I've got a couple handles over here I made before class. So when you pick up that handle, it should hold its shape. It shouldn't be too wet still that it kind of flops out of shape when you lift it up. And I'm just gonna turn my mug around and look for the best place to attach it, which for many of you will probably be the area where that wall came together, right along that seam. I think that, you know, there are always some inconsistencies that sort of get left behind at that point on the wall of a hand-built mug like this. So putting a handle right over some of those inconsistencies, I think it really helps to not necessarily hide them, but distract a little from them so that the focus on the rest of the wall is more on the clean design that you have going on the remainder of that slab, okay? So when I go to attach it, here, let me create a little cushion for myself using my plastic so I can just lay that down on my board, okay? All right, so when I go to attach it, I'm just going to place that handle right on top. Again, because it's leather hard, it's holding its shape and I don't have to try to keep it in shape while I'm doing this. And I'm just gonna use my needle tool or another tool to mark where that handle is situated on that mug. So just right underneath here, and then right on the top there. And then maybe a little bit on the sides so that you know exactly where you're gonna be scoring and slipping. Same thing down at the bottom. And I'm just putting this handle right in the middle of the wall of my mug, but I could have also, you know, spent a little bit of time just moving it down, seeing how I like it like that, moving it up a little bit higher. Again, think about the balance. A mug that has a handle closer to the top feels a little more bottom heavy, whereas something that's either in the middle or closer to the bottom, you have a little bit more control over, because as that liquid gets drunk down, you have that weight still hanging out at the bottom. So sometimes a handle that's in the middle or closer to the lower part of the mug feels a little more comfortable, okay? All right, so then it's just a matter of taking that handle off, scoring, slipping, both on the mug and on those little flat areas of the handle itself. Okay, so when you're doing that, just kind of gently support it, hold it as you're scoring so that you don't push that handle out of place. Just be gentle, delicate with your clay. Okay. And again, just score those little flat areas on your handle. All right. And then add your water or your slip, make that slip on the surface. And then when you go to attach it, be sure that you're giving good pressure right here and here at these points where that connection is being made. Okay, without that pressure, your handle is gonna fall off as the mug begins to dry altogether. Okay, and we really don't want that. We want that good pressure to hold this piece to the main body of the mug. Okay. Can I answer any questions about any part of that process at this point?